So really, I wanted to draw on your experience in the telecom sector over the last decade or so. And if you can just start off maybe by talking about the Indian government's approach to regulating the telecom sector itself, right? What have been its priorities? What have been its objectives? And how that's evolved over the years that you have analyzed this sector. And if you can just place the draft telecom bill in that context, that would be a great way to, I think, kick things off.
Yeah, thanks, Alman. All the verticals that you mentioned is actually all closely related with each other. So you can't separate out those verticals as individual compartments. So that's very, very important to know. The most important thing to be concerned about and worried about is the licensing approach. And I find the licensing approach, to use a very harsh word, fundamentally flawed. And the reason I say that is that whenever you are licensing an entity, it has to serve an objective, a set of objectives. That's very, very important to understand. So what are the objectives? The objective is, the most important objective is that an entity which is getting licensed is using certain bottleneck resources. There are no bottleneck resources, then it is free for all. Everybody and anybody can participate. It's important because there could be bottleneck resources like spectrum, right-of-way, numbering resources. Those are scarce resources. Now, if you are going to make it free for all, and if you don't manage the bottleneck resources properly, then it may lead to inefficient usage. Second, it may lead to grabbing of those bottleneck resources to prevent entry of others. And it may lead to wastage of bottleneck resources. And all the three that I mentioned actually is clearly evident in our telecom sector, right? The references have been, a lot of spectrum is lying waste for such a long period of time. It is not being getting used. Then the entry of players in the market has been artificially blocked. You start with 1995 when the basic services license was auctioned. What was the need for auctioning a license which did not use them? And at that particular point of time, the government really was struggling to basically provide the telephone connections. Why would you basically create a barrier, an artificial barrier, and in the process create such a big problem that people, bid, like mad, and then raise the prices, and in the point that they lend all their money to the government and then they can't roll out. So that's very, very important point to note. So that's the important point about licensing, the regulatory approach. The second piece is that there are other aspects of regulation, for example, competitiveness of the market. If you disturb the competitiveness of the market and don't preserve the competitiveness of the market, then everybody gets impacted. The startups get impacted, the consumer gets impacted, there are no choices, and the players will have the full leverage to not only raise price, but the quality of service will go down. And also the technology innovation will by doing nothing, because the market is completely captured by them, right? So that is a very important dynamics to look at, that whether the market is sufficiently competitive or not. And the third important point is this notion about level playing. I think this is the most misused and most misunderstood notion, level playing. There is no need to have level playing, first of all. Do you have level playing field in your life? Are these people equally placed in your life? You only regulate those who are powerful, who can cause damages into the sector and prevent others to intervene and enter the sector. So you should allow players free for all to enter the market and play in the market, and only regulate those players who actually have become very big, and their presence in the market can disturb the market equilibrium and prevent the other players to I'll stop here because there are many things, Alman, I can keep on saying. I don't, there is nothing gets lost between the cracks.
Sure. Thank you, Parag. Firstly, just a point of note, there was a little bit of a disturbance, I think, between some of your remarks. So for, I think, the benefit of the audience as well, I'm just going to quickly summarize what you were saying, just a couple of points. One, I think this idea that the licensing approach, of course, is flawed for several reasons. It, I think, obviously starts from a fundamental flaw in assumption about, the type of resources and the scarcity of certain resources. So I think that's something we need to keep in mind. Two, I think you were talking a little bit about competitiveness of the market and how you believe that issues of quality of service, for example, and price and affordability are related to the competitiveness. So I think I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about that. And then lastly, you touched on this idea of a level playing field, right? And clearly, this is something that the regulator, both in India but around the world, have been putting out as a potential regulatory objective. And this is definitely something we're seeing in the Telecom Bill. So thank you for those opening remarks. Just wanted to dig into a couple of these points, right? And if you can talk maybe even in the context of what you've seen in the draft Telecom Bill, that would be helpful. One is in terms of this idea of licensing itself, right? We'll talk about this in more detail in the panel. But I think this idea that potentially licensing could be an entry barrier for startups, right? Have you had some time to think about potentially what the objective of that broad definition for services is, why they're contemplating a stricter regulatory framework, whether it's licensing or registration for new entrants into the space, and potentially what the impact could be on startups, right? So maybe if you can just start with that, maybe we can pick up a few more threads as well.
See, first point one, we need to understand that the government is fully empowered to license. So you can't really say that the government is not empowered, because whether this is the new Telecom Bill or the old Telegraph Act, both are same as far as the empowerment is concerned. So the notion that is actually completely ill-founded. It is not. It is only specifying certain things which actually were not clearly spelled out in the earlier Telegraph Act. So that is very, very important point. The second point is that whether you can license, and whether you want to license, and whether it is practically possible to license. There are various points of discussion. You can license because you are fully empowered, right? Whether you want to license, right, is a point to be debated, because what regulatory purpose it solves if you license, right? And then whether it is practically possible to license. Let me give you an example. Now, look at this whole issue about OTT, right? What is the issue about OTT? OTT actually is being debated under multiple dimensions. One is the telecom players and the OTT players fighting with each other. That's not the issue that we are discussing here. We are discussing here a point that the individuals who can harm the other side, who are gullible, who don't know how to use the app, and they are basically going to be at fraud. There will be fraud which will take place. So basically, this whole OTT thing is coming from that point of impersonation. Now, my point is that if that is the issue that you want to solve, because there are many other issues like, calling line identification, intervention, and all, those are things which you should not debate, because you just have to cut to the chase. What's the problem? The problem is impersonation. Now, I will ask a very fundamental question. Have you been able to solve the problem in the telecom space? Right, today, we have been debating this for such a long period of time. TRA has been coming after with papers and papers after paper. Have you been able to solve it? You have licensed players, right? Who are working on the ground. Have you been able to solve the problem? You haven't been able to solve the problem. So, their control over the services are direct in nature, because they are working the physical layer. Now the OTTs are actually on top of it. They are not even in the physical layer. Now you are asking the OTT player to do certain things which you could not get the telecom players to achieve. It's a huge contradiction, right? Right? We can go and debate on the technicalities as to what is possible, what not possible, because that's a different point of debate. I want to debate this in a principle level, right? So first, fix your house. First, let the telecom players solve their problem. I have been getting some 10 calls in the morning, and I block them, and they keep coming, right? Those calls are not getting blocked. The spams are not made. You actually apply blockchain and those technologies which we have been talking about, will help, and you keep going to the service provider, TRA on the mobile phones, on direct calling.
Sure. No, Parag, thank you for that. I think another key point, right, that I'm hearing you talk about is, and I really appreciate the first principles approach you're adopting, right, which is what's the problem you're trying to solve? You're obviously linking it to a particular harm, whether it's impersonation, right, trying to identify potential, call masking issues, fraudulent scams of that nature, and really trying to understand whether licensing could be a solution to that. And I think it seems like from your perspective, perhaps this might not be the right approach, right? So I think that's a really useful approach, and we're seeing this across different regulations. You need to link the potential obligation to the risk of harm to be very to be able to kind of identify that very clearly and use the right regulatory instrument. So I think really appreciate your comments on that. And on a lighter note, if I can say, one other issue clearly we're facing is quality of service issues. I think, even with your remarks, definitely facing some disturbance. So we'd love to see, some of those issues be resolved as well before we move to some of these other issues. The one issue I think want to dig a little bit more, if we have, a couple of minutes maybe, is this question of innovation, right? It's obviously a key central area of this in terms of impact that we want to analyze. In all of your experience, I'm sure you've dealt with new and emerging technologies, whether it's white space technologies or, things like Project Loon, really innovative ideas. But I think one of the goals of this Telecom Bill has been to be able to make India a global leader in telecom, right? Whether it's through manufacturing, exports, have new and emerging technologies. What is your sense of whether the Telecom Bill will be able to do that? What should a Telecom Bill have, again, from first principles? And do you see some of those elements in this bill? And maybe if you'd like to take a few examples of some failed experiments and what might have helped make them successful.
See, again, I will go to fundamentals, Alman. Fundamental thing is that who is doing innovation and why? Why would I do innovation? Tell me. Innovation requires money. A lot of resources are required. If I am doing innovation, it should serve a purpose. What is the purpose? Should be able to generate Nobody does innovation for the sake of charity, right? Whatever requirements that I want to innovate because I want to be competitive in this space. I should not only be competitive in India, but globally. And that's why I should innovate. Now, the point here is that if the market becomes uncompetitive, there is no threat in the market, and you are in a closed space. Let me ask you, if you are in a protected environment, what is that you're going to do, right, in order to further protect yourself from no competition which is coming from outside? So you won't do anything because it costs money, and you will be looking at your shareholders' value. So when you say the technology is there, this technology, that technology, it means nothing. Technology does not solve any problem. Only thing that solves problem is whether that technology is helping the business to add more value to the ability of the business to generate more profits and revenue. I have to understand that if India has to become technology giant, let me give you one or couple of points. First, you have to fix the competitiveness of the market. Make sure that the market is first competitive, which is not today, right? Because of the past regulatory action. Make sure that the resources that are available, the bottleneck resources that are available for use, are available to anybody and everybody who wants to use it in an affordable and an optimal manner. Not raise the bottleneck resource just because somebody acquire a particular chunk of spectrum at a particular price. Nobody should get it below that price. That's a wrong method of auctioning. That's why we are in a particular situation, because there is no motivation for anybody to cover their risk. Suppose I bid in the auction and I know that it is like a flat. I bid in Mumbai flat and I take a flat, the price will never come down. Why should I be worried about, bidding in a responsible manner? I will not. That is the important point, is that you have to build the market, develop the market. If you have a market where the purchasing power is 20,000 rupees in household, right? 70% of the market is like that. Who is going to buy your technology? You have to basically look forward towards the global market to innovate for. Your innovation will be for the globe. And the globe is going to be, it is a very risky thing to do. You have to first innovate for the local market, and the market has to be developed. If you don't develop the market, there is no way you can innovate. And the third important thing is basically participate in the standard development process. If you are process and you just participate for the sake of PR, gains, related activity, you have to be there. Like China for last 20 years have been fighting the ITU. They used to send a member of 50-member team in all the ITU meetings, all educated, sharp people, right? With knowledge about technology and know-how. So if you are not doing all these things and you're thinking that there will some magic will take place, I'm very sorry to say, there is no magic. Magic does not happen. It only happens in magic shows. Okay. There is no magic happens in real life.
On that note, Parag, thank you so much. I've taken a few points. I mean, it was really nice that you actually also suggested some very specific interventions that policymakers should be taking very quickly, make the market competitive, right? I think that's a key, prescription that you've made. Two is innovation starts at home, right? So you can talk about being a global leader in telecom, but you have to start by developing the local market, whether it comes to technology, innovation, competitiveness. And that's a key, I think, point you talked about. And then when it comes to telecom, I think really this idea that you've been talking about bottleneck resources, scarce resources, and really about thinking about the efficient allocation of these resources, I think is something that you've been talking about on this session. And lastly, this idea that we really need to be participating more in standard setting, right? In larger technical governance issues, both in India and outside. So with that, Parag, thank you so much for setting the context. I think sets the stage for a much more deeper, richer conversation that we're going to have.